So far, we've talked a lot about how games are made in theory, general principles of design. And even then, we start out our designs on paper, so programming isn't even involved right away. You've watched 15 videos on this, and you're still here. So I have to ask, in all this time, have you gone and made a game yet? Don't answer, this is only a video, I can't answer you back. But if you haven't been inspired yet to make something playable, why not? As we've seen several times, if you just have a pencil and some paper or a computer, you already have all the tools you need to make something. What are you waiting for? If you were waiting on permission, or waiting until you felt more comfortable knowing how to design games before you start to actually do it on your own, I have some news for you. You're never going to be that comfortable. You'll feel better about it the more games you've made, and the more practice you've had, even on your own personal projects, even with games that ended up turning out really terribly. So you may as well start creating now. So in this video, that's what I'm going to talk about. How to go from idea to playable prototype, and how to do it as quickly and easily as possible.
So it starts with coming up with a concept for the game. What kind of game are you going to make? We've talked about this before in terms of how putting together a design vision that considers the core mechanics and the pillars and the vision statement of the game way back near the beginning of this course. As you know now, game design is more than just coming up with a single high concept for the game and then sitting back and waiting for other people to build it. There's a lot of work that goes into building all parts of the design. But coming up with ideas, what we call ideation, is still a task that has to be done. Some game designers are natural idea fountains. They come up with new ideas for games on a regular basis, so the ideation step isn't a problem for them. The problem for them is that it can take years to take a game from idea to completion, and if you're coming up with a new idea for a game every week, you'll have more ideas than you can possibly work on, so you need to figure out how to narrow those down so you're only working on the ones that have a high likelihood of success. We'll talk about how to do that later in this video. But there are also some designers who don't actually come up with new ideas very often. They don't really feel like creative people. And so if it's just you and you feel that way about yourself, and you have no ideas for original games and don't know where to find them, how do you even get started? So let's talk about that first. So this is just the ways that I have personally seen game ideas come from. This is not a complete list. I'm not sure if it's even possible to make a complete list. This comes entirely from my own experience, but hopefully it'll be enough to get you started. Basically, the way I see most ideas merge is starting with one thing, where you say, I want to make a game that has this one specific thing in it, and then after you know that thing first, then you figure out what everything else in the game has to be or has to do in order to support that one thing. So, what's the thing that comes first? Well, it can be any of these things that I have listed here. So it can be, I have this idea for a core mechanic. I think this one player system interaction would be interesting or compelling. Systems designers like me tend to start here a lot. We can instead start with an experience, aesthetics in the MDA sense. Basically, what kind of feeling do I want the player to feel when playing this game? And then from there, work backwards to say, okay, what kinds of dynamics and mechanics do I need to make that would produce that feeling? This is a popular starting point with student games at schools that emphasize innovation, but professional games can start here too. John Romero has said in interviews, for example, that his masterpiece Doom was created around the idea of making a game that triggers the player's fight or flight response. Game designers who lean more towards the creative writing side than the mechanics side often start with some element of story, either saying, I have this cool idea for a narrative, or I have a story, or I have this neat idea for a world or a setting that a story could take place in, and then figuring out from there what mechanics would make sense to really highlight that story. You can start by saying, I have something in the real world that I need this game to accomplish. It might be having your game teach its players a skill, maybe you're supposed to create a game to advertise a product, or a game that will raise awareness of a social issue that means a lot to you. In general, the blanket term for games that have a purpose beyond entertainment is serious games. Many of those games start here by saying, this game has to perform a certain function, and the gameplay is just funneling players toward that purpose. Sometimes a game comes from there being a market need for a certain type of game. It's not that common for designers to choose to start here, but it's very common at professional studios for this to be a starting point. Like maybe there's a certain genre that hasn't had a big game in a while, and the next one to be announced isn't even due out for another couple of years. So if you can get something in that genre released in 18 months, then there's a built-in audience who will be hungry for it. So you start with that. Or you notice an underserved population demographic that buys a lot of games but doesn't have many games made specifically for them. This is usually the kind of thing where a game studio gets funding from a publisher or somewhere else to build a specific kind of game for a specific target audience, and then that's given to the designer to say, here, make this for these people. And that's where you have to start. Games made with an IP are also like this. IP meaning intellectual property. So like some kind of big name license. Like your studio gets the license to work on a Star Wars game that's supposed to release concurrent with the next movie. So your target audience is fans of the movies, that kind of thing. Sometimes you're inspired by a system that you see in the real world. Maybe you're interacting with some system in the world. Maybe a government bureau, maybe a restaurant, maybe driving through traffic, maybe school, could be anything. And you just think to yourself, I think I kind of understand this part of how the system works, and it's actually really interesting. You could make a game about that. And then you figure out how to make a game where the core mechanics basically model that system or part of it. I call this system first here, but really a lot of the time what this comes down to is just being inspired by the real world. Sometimes it's not the player-system interactions that matter, but the player-player interactions. You have an idea for a way that players will treat each other, a specific way that players will engage with each other, and then you work backwards from there to figure out what mechanics and dynamics will cause players to encounter each other in a certain way. Games can come with all kinds of constraints on them aside from the market opportunities. Sometimes it's just a name or a phrase. Someone says something in a conversation and they accidentally say the words wrong, and you just think, wow, that thing you just said would make a great title for a game. I have no idea what the game is, but that's a great title. So now you've got the name of the game, but you have no idea what the game is yet, so now you have to figure out a game that's worthy of the name. And believe it or not, there's actually been at least one successful commercial game project that started off because someone wrote a fake name of a game on a whiteboard in an office and just kept writing it there as part of a running gag in the office until eventually they decided to just make it for real. Occasionally, a designer will be inspired by a programmer who figures out how to do a cool new thing, and they need to figure out how to use that thing. Back in 2016, when there was a whole new generation of VR hardware taking off, lots of designers were starting with the idea of, okay, the player's wearing a VR headset to play a game, now what? In the early days at id Software, several games came out about because of tech. Someone figured out how to do smooth side-scrolling and platforming on a PC for the first time, when before that you could only really do that on console hardware. And what they really wanted to do was make a port of Super Mario 3, except Nintendo said no. So they made their own game, Commander Keen, basically because they figured out the tech behind fast side-scrolling and figured they may as well use it for something. Same thing later with Wolfenstein 3D, where they figured out how to do 3D graphics with a reasonable frame rate. And these days, it's kind of a running joke that if someone makes any kind of computing device, someone will figure out how to run Doom on it. But I think a much more interesting question is designing for the hardware itself. Like, sure, okay, you can take a medical ultrasound machine and get it to run Doom, but if you've already got access to a medical ultrasound machine, how about making a game that actually is designed for the ultrasound machine as the input controller, using the equipment to do ultrasound stuff that's all actually designed specifically for that platform? That would be way more interesting than getting Doom to run on it. So my point is you can be inspired by tech. And lastly, there's what I might call polish, as in take an existing game or game genre and say, this thing is really cool and there's a lot of potential, but it has some issues. How about I make a game that's like that, only better? So we're not talking purely about making a clone of an existing game, more like clone then tweak, improve, polish, fix. Lots of people talk about cloning games with a negative connotation as if that's something that isn't creative or interesting, but then they'll happily play games from Blizzard. And Blizzard's pretty much the only thing they do at that company is take existing games and then polish them to make them really shine. So I would say there's plenty of design skill in taking an existing game or genre, identifying the problems and potential areas for improvement, and then doing the hard work to really make a best-in-class game of that type. And this is also a very common starting point for new designers, because a lot of people have a game that they love to play that's their favorite, and that game was part of the inspiration for what got them interested in wanting to make games in the first place, is that they'd like to make something just like that, their favorite game, that inspired them, only make it a little better. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of different potential sources for ideas. And again, like I said, those are just the sources that I've encountered myself in my own career. I'm sure there are many more ways to get inspired. But if you're one of those people who has trouble with inspiration, Hopefully this can help you find some. Now, if you already have more ideas than you know what to do with, or at least you're comfortable ideating now, the next question is, okay, you have a great idea for a game, now what? And the answer, in most cases, is rapid prototyping. So, a prototype is our name for something that is at least somewhat playable or usable. Doesn't have to be complete, doesn't have to be entirely functional, just barely functional enough to answer some questions about the game you're building. And the rapid part is rapid as in fast, as in like build the thing quickly, sacrifice everything for speed. A rapid prototype is not something you intend to ever release publicly. It is a way to figure out if your idea will even work. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. You can get more ideas. But you don't want to sink months or years of your life into something that is just fundamentally doomed from the start. So if the idea isn't going to work, you want it to fail quickly, so you can spend your time working on something else instead that has a better chance of success. So the purpose of a prototype should be to answer a question about the unknowns of the game. Realistically, the only way you'll go into a game project knowing everything about it from the start and knowing for sure that everything will work the way you want it to is if that game already exists and it was already made by someone. And if that's the case, then the game was already made. You don't have to make it again. Well, okay, maybe you do want to make it again if you're practicing your programming skills or something, but if you're doing game design, do at least something new. But that does mean that you're going to be taking some creative risks, that some of your ideas might not work as well as you think, that it might, once you actually have it playable, it might not be quite as cool as it seemed like it would be when it was in your head. So basically, you have something about your game that you're not sure of, so you want to verify that the parts of your idea that you're unsure of will actually work. So that's your purpose. Figure out whether your idea is actually worth doing for real. Now, you might recall me saying something very similar, a couple of videos ago with playtesting. And yes, there is a parallel here. For an awful lot of design risk, the way to answer the question of will this work is to play it, which means building at least part of the game so to get it playable so that you can playtest it and see. Now, these are not the only kinds of prototypes that can be built when you're making a video game. For example, there might also be some technical unknowns, like you're planning to put a very large number of sprites or polygons on the screen at once, and you want to make sure your graphics engine can handle that at a decent frame rate, so you'll build your technical prototype to test that out. And a technical prototype for that might not even have any gameplay associated with it at all. It might just be throwing a bunch of polygons to the screen and measuring the frame rate, and having them move around automatically. But as designers, most of our design prototypes that test design things are going to be looking towards playtesting as the way to verify, which means that you're going to want to build your prototype for that playtest. Now, this next part is honestly the hardest part, because you really have to make some tough choices about what you need to include. And obviously, for the purpose of verifying a design, the optimal case for playtesting would be to build the final game and test that. But if you do that, you don't have to worry about any differences between the prototype and the final game. The problem is that it'll take too long to build the final game. So figure out what doesn't need to be there in order to answer the questions and find the answers that you need. Make every mechanic, every piece of content, everything in the game fight for its life to be included. The trick here is to look for things that are unique to your game, because the stuff that you already know works doesn't need to be tested. When I teach this in a classroom, a lot of students have a really hard time like this. Like, for example, maybe a student team is making a first-person shooter that's supposed to have some unique weapon that's never been done before, and that weapon is what the entire game concept is based on. And then when they go to build their very first prototype, they come to me and they've built a generic first-person shooter, like without their one thing that they were building it around. Like, okay, we already know first-person shooters work well in terms of core gameplay. We've known this since 1993, so you just spent a bunch of effort proving nothing because it was already proven. So if instead they just implemented the gun and nothing else, no movement, no other weapons, just that one thing, that actually would be far more useful. So if you're making a game already in an established genre, generally avoid testing anything that's already a core part of that genre. The reason it's a genre is that there's already multiple successful games that all share basically the same set of core mechanics. You don't need to test that part. Just test the parts that are new or novel or otherwise unknown and cut everything else. Like, if you've got a game with multiple interconnected systems, but only one of them is new, just make that one new system and just hand wave over the other systems. Either cut them entirely or simulate them. Like, let's consider this diagram of the scaled down RPG from the last video. If you just want to test out the combat system of a game, you can do that. Notice there's nothing in here about gold or item drops, no shopping for better equipment in towns, nothing about exploration that opens up new areas with more challenging combats. If all you're doing is testing out a novel combat system, you don't need the rest of that stuff. Just give me a playable combat with pre-generated characters and pre-generated loot and pre-generated monsters, and that's it. Even this diagram here is probably too much. You could cut most of the rest of this diagram too. Don't even bother with XP and leveling, just give me a playable combat. Some of my guys against some enemies, enough equipment and abilities to make the kinds of choices you want to show off in combat, that's it. So once you've identified the bare minimum of features that you need to answer your design question, the next thing to determine is, what's the fastest way to actually make that thing? And I'll tell you a secret, 9 times out of 10, the answer is to do it on paper or in a spreadsheet or some other method that does not involve writing code. Because writing code is very slow in comparison to just about any other method of building games. And most of the time, you can get close enough without it. Let's take that RPG combat example from before. What do you normally need for RPG-style combat? You got some characters, some options of what actions to take, like fight, use items, skills, run, whatever you've designed. You can do that on paper. Similar to the combat options you'd have in a tabletop RPG like Dungeons & Dragons. Okay, so maybe you're thinking the computer RPG might have far more complex math formulas to determine damage from an attack roll, and all those calculations would be unwieldy if you played a simulation on tabletop. Sure, but do those really need to be that complicated if you're just trying out the mechanics in a very basic form? If not, then simplify the numbers. Maybe you have 3 hit points instead of 300, or if it does need to be a complex formula, maybe you just put that formula in a spreadsheet and use the spreadsheet to handle your random damage rolls so that you don't have to do it by hand. You might think, but the game I want to build is played in real time. It's an action game. How can I possibly model that on tabletop? And the answer, in a lot of cases, is you totally can. Change it to a turn-based game where each turn simulates, say, 5 or 10 seconds of actual play. So if you're modeling a first-person shooter on tabletop, maybe you can move a certain number of spaces on a board, turn, aim, and shoot, all based on about how much you could do in just a few seconds. If you really think about it, a game running at 60 frames per second is just a turn-based game with 60 turns per second, right? Likewise, if you have something that takes some dexterity or timing skill, like being able to aim accurately in a shooter or make a difficult precision jump in a platformer, you can simulate that with a die roll. Like, making a difficult jump might be something you want people to fail at about half the time, so just flip a coin to see if the player made the jump. And yes, this means players can't actually use the skill, so if having players actually use their skill for this thing is the thing you want to test, then yeah, this won't help, and you might actually have to have someone write some code for that. But if you're just trying to simulate walking through a level or overall danger of a level, yeah, you can totally roll dice to see if a player did a thing. And that'll give you a general idea about how that works. I'll also point out you can use whatever materials are available to you at the time. You don't have to get professional grade prototyping materials, whatever those would be. You want a game board? Draw one on a standard sized sheet of paper. Want some cards? Take another piece of paper and rip them up into a bunch of small slips of paper and then write on the slips. It's messy, it's rough, but you can shuffle them and you can play them. If you really can't stand that, then spring for some fancy index cards, just normal plain old index cards that you get in an office supply shop. Those shuffle really well. They're thick enough to write on without being able to read the writing from the other side, and you can cut them in halves or thirds if you want something smaller and easier to hold. You need tokens to represent players or NPCs or enemies on a board? Use any objects at all. Paper clips, coins, pocket lint, basically anything that's mostly flat and won't roll away. Coins make great game components in general. They're cheap, and you can flip them as a random number generator, or you can stack them up for resource stacks. If you happen to own any board games yourself, you can always look inside of those to see if there are additional components that you can harvest from them. Keep in mind, if they're not your games, but you just live under a house with them, make sure to return those things and only take them with permission of the owner. If you do need dice as a random number generator, you might have some from other games, but if not, you can always ask your computer to generate random numbers. Just type random number generator into a search engine, and there's probably one in the engine itself that'll do this for you. Or you can generate random numbers in a spreadsheet easily enough if you know how. And then start testing on your own with yourself as soon as you can. Maybe the final game is a card game with 100 cards in a common deck, but do you really need all 100 cards designed and created to test your game? No. You can probably get by with like 10 cards or so, just enough to play the first 2 or 3 turns. Do you need to have all the rules completely written down and decided on? No. You can just start playing with a general idea of the rules, and when you hit a position the rules don't cover and you're not sure what to do, figure it out right then in the moment. Experienced designers have often make something playable on tabletop in maybe 15 or 30 minutes and be actively playing to test their mechanics immediately after. And maybe the play of the game is short, maybe just like 5 minutes to play and another 5 minutes to make adjustments and fixes based on the playtest, which means, 6 iterations per hour. And in a game jam setting, where you're trying to make an entire game from nothing in a single weekend, getting that many iterations and playtests that quickly means your game will get much better really fast. And that's not even considering how much you can make progress on a team in a professional setting. One of the biggest mistakes I see new designers making is spending far too long building and tweaking and modifying their game without playtesting. And yes, I get that fiddling around with your creation is fun. But if you want it to actually get better, you need to test it yourself and eventually with other people. And if you're not doing that, then you are losing time that could be spent actually improving the game, or else proving maybe that it can't work so that you can spend your limited time on this earth working on some other project instead. I've sat in on playtests where designers had been working on a game for years and this was their first playtest ever, and it was awful. I've sat in on playtests where the designer said, "Hey guys, I just had this idea for a game this morning. I built it in a few hours ago. I'm sure everything about it is totally broken. Want to play it, see how bad it is?" And it was actually really good. Your game gets better when you test and iterate, so get there as quickly as you possibly can. Now, if the idea just doesn't work out and it's better to just stop working on it and move on to a different project until you find one that clearly does have potential. But in practice, you never really kill your ideas. You just put them aside. Like every professional designer I know, and I include myself in this, have a bunch of prototypes that they've done in the past, held in a storage box somewhere, and every now and then we'll go back to those boxes for inspiration. Like maybe you couldn't figure out how to get that game to work now, but maybe 10 years from now, with more experience and more perspective, you'll finally be able to look back and figure it out. Or maybe you'll be working on a game 5 years from now and you'll be stuck with how to handle a certain system, and you'll realize, hey, I got this mechanic from a failed idea I had from 5 years ago that didn't work in that game, but it'll work really well in the game that I'm building right now. So basically all I'm saying here is that we only have limited time to make games while we're alive, so try to maximize the time spent working on good games and minimize the time spent working on bad games. And that means getting some parts of a game playable as quickly as possible so that you can reject it up front before sinking too much time in if it's just not going to work. Now, if you want to learn more about how to make paper prototypes, or why you should, game developers have written about this a lot over the years. When I searched on gamedeveloper.com for the words paper prototyping, I got over 300 results. Now, 300 isn't a lot if we're talking about like number of results for a Google search for web pages, but at Game Developer, that means over 300 articles that people have written about this subject. That's a lot of reading. You can also search on GDC Vault and find plenty of talks about this. If you use a general search engine like Google, you'll probably want to add another term like game to your search, because a lot of other things that aren't games are also prototyped on paper. You can also search for rapid prototyping, which often means on paper for games. And lastly, if you really want to read a whole other book, the link here is this website for a book called Game Design Workshop by Tracy Fullerton. It's a textbook that's used pretty widely in university-level game design classes. And yeah, okay, at this point, you probably don't want to read this textbook any more than you'd want to read my textbook on game balance that I mentioned in the last video. Just keep in mind to come back to this in a few years if you get deeper and deeper into game design and want to learn more on the theory side. This book in particular has some really great chapters on practical how-to of building rapid prototypes on paper and digitally, as well as organizing and running playtests. And it's the best treatment of that subject that I've seen in any book, and is pretty comprehensive in that area. So that part of this book is definitely worth a read at some point as you approach doing game design professionally.
So that's what I have to say on rapid prototyping. Thanks for watching. Now, as usual, go take your assessment so you can get your certification from HP Gaming Garage. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll start talking about how designers communicate with other designers and the rest of their development team.